The night was silent until a phone rang, breaking the stillness. At 2 a.m, a call from an unknown number brought a sense of urgency. Have you ever wondered what lurks in the shadows of a city? What drives a mother to commit the unthinkable? In this video, we will explore a brutal crime that reveals not just a tragedy, but a disturbed mind and a cult that feeds on despair. Prepare for a journey where the quest for truth transforms into a battle for sanity. What would you do to protect those you love? Come discover how this story uncovers horrors that often remain hidden and how you can learn from the mistakes of others. Stay with us and dive into a narrative that could change your perception of what is truly necessary to safeguard our loved ones. The phone rang insistently, breaking the silence of the night. I glanced at the clock on the wall and saw it was nearly 2 a.m. The number on the screen was unknown, but my intuition told me this was no ordinary call. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the apprehension that was forming in my chest. "Almeida," I answered, my voice coming out raspier than I intended. "Chief, we have an urgent case, a brutal crime in the outskirts, at Jardim das Flores." "You need to come immediately," said the voice on the other end, laced with tension. A chill ran down my spine. The outskirts of São Paulo had always harbored dark tales, and I had witnessed horrors I never imagined possible. The tightness in my heart intensified. Another one, I thought. Another tragedy I would have to confront. But this one felt different. I knew that behind every crime was a story, a disturbed mind, and sometimes those stories were more terrifying than the act itself. I got up from my chair, turned on the lamp, and put on my uniform. As I prepared, my mind drifted to memories of other cases, other victims. Each left a mark, an echo that could be felt even years later. I looked in the mirror, trying to find some semblance of courage in my own eyes. "You're the Chief, Fernando. You have to do this," I murmured to myself. Arriving at Jardim das Flores, the scene unfolding before me was one of utter chaos. The police had already cordoned off the building, and the flashing lights of the cars blinked like a warning signal in the darkness of the night. The smell of blood and despair hung in the air, mingling with the stench of sewage and the smoke from passing cars. The tension was palpable. The voices of neighbors murmured among themselves. Some children looked on with curiosity, others with fear. "What happened?" I asked one of the officers at the entrance. "A woman and her son, Chief." "It's horrific. They spoke of dark rituals, but no one really knows what happened," he replied, visibly shaken. With my heart racing, I climbed the stairs, each step feeling like a burden. The hallway was filled with anxious, curious glances. The dirty, peeling walls seemed to absorb the despair emanating from everyone there. As I approached the apartment, a knot formed in my throat. What would I find on the other side of that door? Upon opening the door, the scene before me was one of a horror I could never have imagined. Ana Paula, the young mother, sat on the floor, holding the head of her son, Pedro, just 6 years old, in her lap. Her gaze was distant, as if she were in a trance. The room was filled with strange symbols drawn in what appeared to be blood. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. "My God," I murmured, unable to say anything more. Ana Paula slowly lifted her head, and our eyes met. A disturbing smile emerged on her face as she murmured incomprehensible words. What was happening here? Was this a ritual? An act of desperation, or a manifestation of a shattered mind? I felt my sanity wobble at the grotesque scene. "Why did you do this?" I managed to ask, even knowing that the answer could be as unbearable as the sight before me. She just smiled, as if she had found peace, as if the horror she had just committed didn't affect her at all. That expression left me unsettled, as if, amidst the chaos, she had found some form of redemption. "He needed to be saved," Ana Paula said, her voice soft, almost like she was singing a lullaby. "I did what was necessary." Her words echoed in my mind, and for a moment, I lost myself in the confusion of her emotions. What had led her to this? What had happened in her life for this to be the solution? The surroundings seemed to spin around me as I tried to comprehend the mind of that shattered woman. Those words and that smile remained etched in my memory, like an open wound, as I felt that what was to come would be even more terrifying than I could imagine. The smell of blood still lingered in the air, like a heavy fog enveloping everything around me, as I tried to regain my composure after the shock of the scene I had just witnessed. Ana Paula, the young mother, was there, with a distant gaze and a disturbing smile, and I knew I needed to understand what had led her to this horrifying act. Cautiously, I approached her, trying to maintain a calm demeanor, even though I was in a frenzy inside. "Ana Paula," I began, my voice trembling but firm. "Can you tell me what happened here? What led to this?" She looked at me, her eyes vacant, but her mind clearly in a whirlwind of thoughts. "They promised protection," she said, her voice low and drawn out. "They said I needed to do this to keep him safe." "Who were they?" I asked, trying to pull more information from her. "Talk about the cult." "It was a cult, a group that gathered in the shadows. They found me when I was lost, not knowing where to go. I just wanted to protect my son, Fernando. They said we needed to sacrifice something, someone, to have peace." My heart sank as I heard her words. What she had done was not just a crime. It echoed a deep pain, a desperation that led her to a point of no return. "Ana, you don't have to be afraid to tell me. I'm here to help." She shook her head as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. "But I don't know if it's too late. I didn't want this to happen, Pedro. I just wanted to protect my little one." As she spoke, I realized that there was more to her story. "Where did you come from? How did you meet this cult?" I asked, hoping she would open up more. "I grew up in an abusive home," Ana Paula said, her eyes welling up. "My father, he was a monster. When I met the cult, I thought I had found a family. They promised me everything would be okay, but I didn't know the protection they offered came at such a high price." With every word, I felt the tragedy of her life unfolding before me. It wasn't just about justice, it was a human issue. "Ana, you don't have to be afraid anymore. We'll find a way to help you." The conversation was interrupted by a police officer who entered abruptly, visibly agitated. "Deputy, we need you outside. We have information that some children are missing in the area." "Missing?" The word echoed in my mind. "How many?" "3 so far, and all of them are linked to the same neighborhood," he replied, his eyes wide with concern. "We need to act fast." "Can you stay here, Ana?" I asked, already getting up. "I'll be back soon." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I left the apartment, my mind racing with the new information. What was happening in that community? What else didn't I know? Outside, the murmur of the neighbors grew, and I decided I needed to hear more about the missing children. I found a group of people gathered on a corner and approached them. "Excuse me, I'm Deputy Fernando Almeida. What can you tell me about the disappearances?" A woman with disheveled hair and tired eyes spoke in a trembling voice. "It's all that hooded man's fault. He shows up at night, always in the shadows. Sometimes the children follow him and they're never seen again." "Did you see his face?" I asked, taking mental notes. "No, but he has a presence, a strange energy." "The kids get hypnotized," she replied, distressed. "A boy, Miguel, was so excited to play with his friends, and then suddenly he vanished." What that community was facing was much more than a crime. It was a horror hiding in the shadows, a malevolence that was infiltrating their lives. With every account, the sense of urgency inside me grew. I needed to return to Ana Paula and understand the connection between her, the missing children, and the man who seemed to be at the center of this nightmare. Still reeling from the new information, I returned to the apartment, determined to uncover the truth. What I didn't know was that each answer I sought would lead me deeper into darkness, unraveling a mystery that would challenge not only logic, but also sanity itself. The hours dragged on, and the heavy atmosphere in my apartment felt suffocating. Shadows danced on the walls, and the storm outside only intensified my state of mind. The wind howled, and I found myself immersed in a series of thoughts that wouldn't let me be. Amidst this mental chaos, I recalled what I had discovered about the shadow and its connection to Ana Paula. The hooded man, always lurking, seemed to hold the key to understanding what had happened that horrific night. With a sudden urge, I decided to go to my office, where I had kept the investigation notes. Flipping through the pages, I found a photo of Ana Paula that I had taken during my visit to her apartment. Her gaze, lost and distant, troubled me. How could someone reach such a point of desperation? A loud knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. My heart raced, and I hesitated for a moment. Was it just the storm, or something more? "Fernando, it's me, Clara." Dr. Clara's voice came from the other side, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I opened the door to find her drenched. "Sorry for showing up last minute, but we need to talk about Ana Paula and the shadow. What have you found out?" "Come in," I invited her as she shook off the cold. "The situation is more complicated than I thought. I discovered that the shadow has links to child trafficking. He is not just a bystander, he is part of the problem." Clara furrowed her brow, her gaze fixed on me. "Does this mean he was manipulating Ana Paula in some way, using her traumas against her?" "Exactly. And from what I could gather, the cult she was involved with wasn't just about protection. It also involved sacrifices. She was so desperate that she accepted anything that promised safety for her child. Now it seems she's become a pawn in this macabre game." "We need to find this man before he claims more victims," Clara said, her determination evident. "Do you have any idea where he might be?" "I saw something in the building's security footage. He seemed to be lurking around, always watching. If we can track his appearances, we might be able to locate him." Clara nodded, and together we began reviewing the recordings. Tension mounted with each passing second. The hooded figure appeared at regular intervals, always in strategic locations, always observing Ana Paula. "Look," I shouted, pointing at the screen. "He's here, at the corner of the street, near the park." "We need to go there," Clara suggested, already grabbing her bag. "If he hides in the shadows, maybe we can catch him off guard." The idea of confronting such a dark and unknown figure made me uneasy, but I knew there was no choice. The lives of other children were at stake. The storm outside felt like a harbinger of what was to come, but the determination in Clara's eyes gave me courage. When we arrived at the park, the rain had lessened, but the air still felt heavy. We walked cautiously, our steps muffled by the wet grass. "Fernando," Clara whispered. "Look." I followed her gaze and spotted a shadow moving among the trees. The hooded figure was there, still, as if waiting for us. My heart raced, but I knew we couldn't back down. "Let's approach carefully," I said. "We can't let him escape." As we got closer, the figure slowly turned. The hood obscured his face, but his presence radiated a malevolence that made me hesitate. "What are you doing here?" His voice echoed, low and threatening. "We're here for you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't continue doing this." He smiled, a grin that never reached his eyes. "Ah, but I'm just a messenger. The real power lies in the shadows, and you are far from understanding." In a swift motion, he vanished into the trees, leaving us in a state of disorientation. "We need to go after him," Clara exclaimed, but the sense that something evil lurked nearby made me hesitate. "It's not safe," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. "He's playing a game, and we can't just be pawns in it." We returned to the car, adrenaline coursing through our veins. What we had just experienced was only the beginning of something much deeper and more terrifying. We knew the truth lay ahead, but with every step we took, we seemed to plunge further into darkness. The morning light streamed through the window of my office at the station, but its glow couldn't dispel the darkness that had settled in my mind. The scene in Ana Paula's apartment still haunted me, and I knew I needed help. That's when I decided to call Dr. Clara, a renowned forensic psychologist with whom I had worked on previous cases. If there was a way to understand what had gone through that woman's mind, she would be the right person. When Clara arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. She was a woman of strong presence, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to pierce the soul. "Fernando, what you found is horrific. We need to understand this," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "I feel that there's something deeper in this story. Ana Paula didn't act alone. There's a greater force behind this, and I need to uncover what it is," I replied, struggling to articulate the thoughts that tormented me. We decided to visit the place where Ana Paula used to meet with the cult. The neighborhood was wrapped in an unsettling silence, as if the very air hesitated to welcome us. Upon arriving at the site, an old abandoned warehouse, the atmosphere seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Clara took out her notebook and began jotting down everything. "Look at this, Fernando," she said, pointing to the ground. There were strange symbols drawn in dark paint, forming a circle. "These are ritualistic symbols. They speak of invocations and sacrifices." "This is what I feared," I murmured, feeling a chill run down my spine. Ana Paula was completely entangled with something we don't understand. As Clara examined the symbols, an overwhelming sense of discomfort washed over me. It was as if the eyes of a child were watching me. I looked around, and for a brief moment I saw the image of Pedro, the boy who had been brutally murdered. He was there, in my mind, with his innocent smile. "Fernando, are you okay?" Clara's voice brought me back to reality. "Yes, just a moment," I replied, trying to shake off the vision. But I couldn't. "I think Pedro is trying to tell me something. I feel it." "You need to focus, Fernando. We'll investigate this together," she said, her voice firm yet understanding. We continued to explore the area, and soon we found ritualistic objects like burnt candles and cloth dolls. The atmosphere was heavy, and the air seemed to vibrate with the presence of something that shouldn't be there. It was then that a flood of visions began to overwhelm me. I saw Pedro running, playing, and then the scene shifted to absolute darkness. He was screaming, but the sound didn't reach me. It was as if I were trapped in a nightmare, unable to reach the child who needed help. "Fernando, are you listening? Look at me," Clara shouted, pulling me back. "Sorry, I can't." The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I need to find a way to connect with him. There's something here. I can feel it. Suddenly, the environment changed. A shadow moved quickly at the edge of my vision, and I sensed it. "Fernando, we have to get out of here. This doesn't seem safe," Clara said, her tone now alarmed. Before we could move, the door of the shed burst open with a bang. Hooded members of the cult, their faces concealed by masks, entered. "You shouldn't be here," one of them said, his voice low and menacing. Fear gripped me, but there was no way to retreat now. "Let's go, Clara," I shouted, pulling her back as we tried to find an escape. The struggle began, and the rituals that had once seemed like echoes of the past now materialized into a battle for survival. Shadows danced around us, and the cult members closed in, their faces expressionless, but their intent clear. "We can't let them silence us," Clara yelled as we fought to defend ourselves. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and the need to protect those in danger grew stronger. After an intense struggle, we managed to escape, but not before gathering crucial information about the shadow and its plans. As we ran, my mind raced, thinking about the connection between the cult and my own family. What could I uncover? The revelation that I might be involved in something so sinister left me in shock. "Fernando, we need to go back and investigate this. What you discovered could be the key to everything," Clara said, her determination inspiring me to press on, even with the lingering fear. The connection was forming, and I couldn't stop now. The truth was closer than ever, and I was willing to face anything to uncover it. The lights of the police station flickered, creating an atmosphere of tension that seemed to intensify with each passing second. My mind spun around the revelations I had obtained and the weight of the truth I needed to confront. The idea that my mother had been involved with the cult was a difficult burden to bear. I took a deep breath, trying to gather the courage for what I was about to do. "Fernando, you look pale," Dr. Clara commented as she entered my office. "What's going on?" "I need to talk to my mother," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "About the cult. I found out things." "Are you sure you're ready for this? Family revelations can be devastating," she said, concern etched on her face. "I have no choice. We need to understand how this began, how I got involved in this mess." I left the police station and drove to my mother's house, my heart racing. With each block I passed, childhood memories surfaced, mixed with a deep resentment. What did I really know about her? What didn't I know? When I arrived, I found my mother in the kitchen, preparing a dinner that never seemed to change. The smell of stroganoff filled the air, but I barely noticed. What mattered was what was about to happen. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. She turned around, concern written all over her face. "What happened, Fernando? You look pale." "I found out about the cult, about you and what you did, what you were involved in," I declared, my anger and pain seeping into my voice. "No, it's not what you think." She tried to defend herself, her hands trembling. "Then explain it to me. How could you get involved with people who sacrifice children? How could you leave me in the dark about this?" I shouted, frustration taking over me. She sat down, tears welling in her eyes. "I did it to protect us. They told me it was the only way to ensure that you and I would be safe. At that time, I was desperate." "Desperate? And does that justify what happened?" "Mom, a child died. That boy, Pedro, he didn't deserve this. The pain in my chest intensified, nearly suffocating me. I didn't know it would come to this. I didn't know she would do that. Tears streamed down her face, and a part of me wanted to comfort her, but the anger was stronger. You need to tell me everything, every detail. Who was the shadow? What else have you hidden from me? I needed answers, not excuses. She took a deep breath as if weighing her words. The shadow is more than just a man. He is an entity, something that feeds off despair. I've seen things you can't imagine, and I joined the cult to try to control it, to keep you safe from this evil. Those words left me in shock. An entity? What was she saying? Mom, you need to help me stop this. The shadow is after me, and I'm about to do something risky. Determination surged within me. I'm going to trap the shadow. I need you to help me understand how he operates. She hesitated, looking down before finally agreeing. I'll help you, but you need to promise not to do anything reckless. I promise, but we need to act fast. With Dr. Clara by my side, we began organizing the operation to capture the shadow. The plan was to set a trap in an old mansion where we knew the cult gathered. The tension was palpable as we discussed the details. Fernando, we need a solid plan. He's not just a man, and he knows how to manipulate people. We need to be ready for the unexpected, Clara warned, her eyes fixed on mine. I know, Clara, but we can't hesitate. These children need us. Pedro needs me, I replied, the determination burning inside me. On the night of the operation, the mansion was shrouded in shadows, its sinister appearance amplified by the moonlight. As we took our positions, adrenaline coursed through my veins. I glanced at Clara, who nodded, indicating that we were ready. Let's end this, I murmured before stepping into the place where terror manifested. But something felt off in the atmosphere. A sensation that we were being watched. As we moved, a chilling cold enveloped me. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the mansion's walls, and the world around us seemed to freeze. You think you can capture me? The voice was deep, laden with a malevolence that chilled my blood. You have no idea who you're dealing with. A shiver ran down my spine. When the shadow appeared, a twisted smile on his face, he held something in his hands. My heart stopped. I have Pedro's head, he said, his voice echoing like a nightmare. Terror consumed me. I knew I was facing my greatest dilemma. Save the child or confront the shadow? The anguished scream that echoed in the night wasn't just Pedro's. It was the pain of all the mothers who had lost their children to that evil. The atmosphere in the mansion was thick, almost palpable, as if the very air was charged with pain and despair. I felt the weight of the history those walls held, and the chill racing down my spine made it clear that a confrontation with the shadow was inevitable. As I walked down the dark corridor, the echoes of distorted childlike laughter rang in my mind, as if the souls of the missing children were trying to warn me. The light from the lantern trembled in my hands, reflecting the uncertainty that pulsed within me. When I finally reached the main room, what I saw paralyzed me for a moment. The shadow stood there, surrounded by strange symbols and extinguished candles that seemed to whisper promises of pain. He looked at me, and his eyes were like deep abysses, filled with malice and suffering. You're brave, officer, he said, his voice a chilling echo that made the atmosphere tremble. But bravery isn't what you need here. You need to understand pain. I won't let you harm any more children, I replied, trying to find strength in my determination. I thought of Pedro, of Ana Paula, and all the lives destroyed by that dark figure. You feed on their suffering, but it ends here. The shadow let out a low, cruel laugh. Ah, but you don't understand, Fernando. This suffering is an eternal cycle. Every desolate mother, every lost child, feeds my existence. Ana Paula wasn't the first, and she certainly won't be the last. I felt a surge of rage rising within me, but I knew I couldn't succumb to him. I remembered Ana Paula's diary, which I carried with me like a talisman. Her words, even in her despair, held power. In a moment of clarity, I decided to use them. If you feed off her pain, then let her pain be your ruin, I shouted, opening the diary. The pages fluttered as if a supernatural breeze had swept through. I began to read aloud the passages Ana Paula had written about love and protection, about her quest to save her son. As the words left my lips, a light began to emanate from the diary, growing in intensity. The shadow, initially confident, began to hesitate. "What are you doing? This can't work." "You underestimated the power of a mother's love," I declared, feeling the energy around me transform. Visions of Pedro began to appear before me, his innocent smile illuminating the darkness. He seemed so close, as if trying to guide me. "Pedro, are you with me?" I murmured, feeling a wave of warmth wash over my body. "Help me." The light from the diary intensified, and in an act of courage, I closed my eyes and focused. Pedro's presence grew stronger, and I envisioned his release from that torment. "I set you free, Pedro. Be free." The shadow screamed in anguish as the light expanded, enveloping it. "No, it can't be," it growled, its form beginning to disintegrate. The strength of the love and purity of Pedro's innocence was more powerful than any darkness that malevolent spirit could offer. In a final attempt, the shadow lunged toward me, trying to drag me into its darkness. "You can't escape me," it yelled, but I felt my connection with Pedro protecting me. "You are your own executioner," it continued, but the light emanating from me surrounded me completely. The explosion of light was so intense that I could barely see. When I finally opened my eyes, the shadow had vanished, taken by its own darkness. The mansion, now silent, seemed to have been freed from a tremendous weight. I looked around, my heart still racing. There was an emptiness, but also a sense of peace. I knew it wouldn't be easy to deal with everything that had happened, but I had to move forward. The cycle of pain had been interrupted, but the echoes of what I had seen and experienced still resonated in my mind. As I exited the mansion, I looked up at the sky. The stars shone brightly as if they were watching over me. "I promised to protect the children of this town," I murmured, feeling that in some way, Pedro and Ana Paula were still with me. But the shadow of what I had experienced would never leave me. And so, the whisper echoing in the distance resonated in my mind. "Evil never sleeps."